Welcome to the Little BigHorn Battlefield National Monument. Your tour today will be given by Mrs. Michael's 5th grade class at Crow Agency Public School. The Little BigHorn Battlefield is located on the Crow Reservation in Crow Agency, Montana. It sits about an hour from Billings, Montana. It tells the story of a hot and dusty afternoon on June 25, 1876, when 5 companies of the 7th Cavalry were met in battle by an overwhelming force of Lakota, Sioux, Cheyenne, and Arapaho. On June 26, after the smoke and dust of the battle cleared, 210 cavalrymen and attached civilian personnel lie dead. Our virtual field trip begins with a visit to the Custer National Cemetery at Little BigHorn Battlefield. The graves represent known and unknown soldiers of the nation's wars, women and children from isolated frontier posts, Indian scouts, and Medal of Honor recipients. Along your path, past the cemetery, is a museum and a gift shop. Now we're ready to begin our story, one that we hope tells more than one point of view of the days before and during the battle.
The Great Plains were the last Native American holdout in America as settlers colonized the far west before the Civil War. Few had chosen to live in the plains due to the dry weather and large Indian population. After the Civil War, the U.S. government granted 10% of the plains land to settlers and railroads. A confrontation between the groups has bound to happen in hopes of squishing the Indians' livelihood. The government allowed the railroads to kill scores of buffalo herds to lay railroad tracks, as well as encouraged hunters to kill as many as they could. The more the buffalo were needless, slaughtered, the anger the Indians grew. With the loss of buffalo, the Indians would struggle to survive.
Indians were spread out and hard to find. They rode fast ponies and knew the land better than Custer ever could. They were great fighters since they were not just fighters for themselves but for their culture.
We're going to take you on a field trip to the Little BigHorn Battlefield in Crow Agency, Montana, which is literally in our backyard. We are going to start by telling you the story before the story. The whole thing started over by gold. Gold in the Black Hills of South Dakota, which was Lakota Sioux land. 1851, the USA government gave the Lakota land for their hunting grounds. The treaty said no one could go onto their lands unless they were Lakota Sioux. But as soon as the Americans found gold everywhere, everyone flocked to their hills inside of the Lakota territory. The American government wanted to find a peaceful solution, so they offered to buy the land. The Lakota said no. Even today, they refuse to take any money for the land that was taken from them. At the time, the government thought the Lakota was being uncooperative, so they made another rule. All the natives need to go back and remain in the boundaries of the reservation.
Well, at the time, many of the Lakota were living out on the hunting grounds. They had no way of knowing that the government had changed the rules and they needed to return to the reservation. It isn't like they had cell phones. It was November. The government told them they had until January to return. The Lakota didn't think they were doing anything wrong. They thought they were following the rules, but when they finally heard they were supposed to go back, it was late in the winter. It was too difficult to travel in the deep Montana snow, so they stayed where they were.
The problem was that even though they were told to stay off the Lakota land, many Americans were still going to go. The Lakota believed that it was their right to chase them off and even kill them if necessary. Sitting Bull was a strong leader, and people liked to be part of his camp because no one stole horses from him. The U.S. government started to blame him for all the unrest.
So with all the troubles going, in February, the U.S. government pushed soldiers to go out and push the Indians back to the reservations. Three columns of soldiers headed out from one Fort Gibbons near Bozeman, that was where the Crow tribe was, Fort Abraham Lincoln, where Custer was, and from Wyoming, led by Colonel Terry and Colonel Cook. The Cheyenne were camped at Powder River Mountain. Cook and Terry's soldiers attacked the camp, but had left an opening near rough, rocky outcrops, and the Cheyenne saw an out and ran, but they left without anything in a hurry, and there was a late Montana blizzard, so they were freezing. The soldiers were freezing too, so they went back to Wyoming without any hostages. The Cheyenne found Crazy Horse's camp. Crazy Horse was a great warrior, but he only had his family with him and nothing to help the large group of Cheyenne, so he took them to find Sitting Bull.
Sitting Bull and Crazy Horse were both Lakota, but from different bands. Once they got there and told of the attack, they decided they needed to make a camp safe for Sitting Bull, set up camp back, and the Cheyennes set up in the front. They were camped by Reno Creek, Montana. As more people joined the camp, it grew to be full of thousands of people. That was of the biggest camps ever. The government asked the Cheyennes and the Lakota to be scouts for them. Scouts helped to find game or food for the soldiers, as well as enemies. The Indians said no, so the government went to the Crows and Shoshones, and they said yes. Their numbers had diminished due to disease, and it was way to protect their people. And the government began sending more soldiers.
The chiefs came together and decided they did not want to fight, but Crazy Horse said he did. He told the people that he would ride his horses around the camp 4 times, and anyone who wanted to join him could. The camp was about 2 miles long. By the time he was done, so many warriors joined him that they completely circled the camp. The Crow Scouts were sent out to find the Cheyenne and Lakota. When they found them, they were chased back towards the soldiers. The Crow and Shoshone set up a fire line and battled for 20 minutes. Then the soldiers had been playing cards and relaxing and weren't ready for the fight, so the scouts stalled the battle so they could get ready.
There was a lot of shooting going on in the battle, but only 10 people died. The warriors left and headed back to Reno Creek. The Crow Scouts quit, and said they didn't want to be involved anymore, but in a field state, the soldiers were out of bullets, so they didn't follow.
This was called the Battle of Rosebud, but the natives call it Girl Who Saves Her Brother battle because a boy had his horse shot from under him, and his sister rode him and saved him. Now the government told Custer to bring the Indians in and don't let them go to the south.
When Custer got to the camp, he couldn't tell how many there was in the camp because of the hills. He thought there were only about 500 and it would be an easy battle. The Crow Scouts who were helping Custer saw there were a massive herd of horses in the Wolf Mountains.
The count was now 700,000 to 8,000 people and 20,000 horses in the hills behind the river.
Although the memorial for Custer and Last Stand Hill is near the museum and the entrance to the park, the battle really began a few miles to the south. It's a nice drive through the rolling hills to Calhoun Hill and Greasy Grass Ridge, and finally to the end of the road where the memorial to Reno and his men stand, and walking past leads you through the events of the days. We're going to start here so as to better understand the sequence of events from June 24th to June 26th.
This area was occupied by troops A, B, D, G, H, K, and M of the 7th Cavalry and the Pack Train when they were attacked by the Sioux Indians June 25th and June 26, 1876.
We camped in the valley along the side of the greasy grass. It was a very big village and you could count on the teepees. Along the side toward the east, it was the greasy grass with some timbers along it.
Custer Scout see the massive horse herd. Curly from the Crow tribe in Bloody Knife, who was Sioux and Arikara, remained with Custer as scouts. The job of the scouts at the time of the battle was to drive off the pony herd of around 20,000. They understood the fact that the pony herd was vitally important in the fighting power of Lakota. Lone teepee, June 25th, 1876, around 2 p.m. Coming down Reno Creek, Custer pauses at the key located. The teepee contains the remains of those killed in the Battle of Rosebud. The week before, the Indians flee toward the village, so Custer's orders on Reno's men to continue down.
Custer divides his command to strike the camp. Usually Custer likes to attack in the early morning and thought about surprising attack on the 26th, but he receives a report that several Indians had discovered a trail left by his troops, so he decided to attack without daily. Custer divided the troops between himself, Reno, Benteen, and Captain McDonald, who was in charge of a slower pack train carrying water. The pack train gets stuck in a swampy area, and the barrels refuse to move, keeping McDowell stranded out of the fight.
After crossing the Little BigHorn River, Reno battalion gallops down the river and down the valley below. He sees thousands of Indians. Reno dismounts and forms a skirmish line across the valley floor. Firing into the lodges, warriors in great numbers rush forward to defend the village. In 10 minutes of fighting, they are surrounded, and Reno retreats into the trees. Sitting Bull tells the women and children to flee to the north and the west. And from across the river, I could hear the music of the bugle and could see the column of soldiers return to the west. to march down the river when the attack was to begin. All I could see was the warriors of my people. They rushed like children through the village. This is spotted Rumble Papa Dakota.
About 3:15 to 3:55 Reno occupies a defensive position in the tree. 49th, one of the scouts is shot in the front of Reno, and Reno begins giving confusing orders as he deals with the death. The soldiers are getting on their horses to retrieve, then getting off to stay and fight.
Major Marcus Benteen. The very earth seemed to grow Indians, and they were running toward me, determined to defend the village. Warriors soon penetrate through the woods. Reno retreats across the river and into the hills.
The scouts had failed in their attempt to carry out Custer's order because Reno's soldiers failed to hold a defense on the other side of the river. This left an opening for the Lakota warriors who crossed the river and came down on the scouts, who had started to drive the ponies off. The scouts headed for the safety of the higher ground overlooking the river.
Shallow trenches were dug at the location the morning of June 26 by some of Captain Benteen's men. Under fire and with only 3 or 4 shovels available, many of the digging was done with knives, hatchets, and messenger. Dead horses and mules were dragged up and laid on the parapet as added cover. This trench was restored in June 1958 to its original dimensions. A field hospital was set up to collect the wounded. Many of Reno and Benteen's men had been wounded in the fight and in the retreat.
Orders to retreat as men are chased by warriors running along. The troops killed about 40 soldiers as they attempt to reach safety beyond the river. Few warriors were killed.
After Benteen joined his command with Reno's, no one gave further directions to the scouts. They were free to stay or go. The scouts under Custer never were used for line fighting. They were trained for skirmishes, small fights, as well as for trailing, capturing pony herds of the enemy, and finding the enemy. However, Curly doesn't leave. He was only 17 and wanted to prove himself, but then he saw the retreat. He left the fight.
Custer watched Reno attack in Movavi. Custer sends back a message with orders for the pack train to reinforce, and Custer 5 companies began to head north, trying to find the lower end of the camp. If these 7 companies with their ammunition had
gone to his aid, their united force might have enabled Custer to save his soldiers.
At about 4 p.m. on Sunday, June 25th, 1876, the veteran remnants of major three companies reached the bluffs following a disaster of an attack
In the valley, the warriors who pursued Reno's retreating command left the pursuit and went downstream. Reno's was soon joined by Captain Between's battalion of 3 companies and the pack train with an additional 130 men. At the time, gunfire was reported north where Custer had moved. Whereupon elements of Reno's force in an attempt to communicate with Custer went to Wherepoint, about a mile north. However, they met up in an overwhelming number of the Sioux and Cheyenne. The cavalry was forced back to the bluffs at about 7 p.m. Hundreds of warriors have defeated Custer, surrounding the remaining 7 companies of the 7th Cavalry and being fired a hail of bullets into the soldiers' position. Everybody lay down and spread himself out as thin as possible. After lying there a few minutes, I was horrified to find myself wondering if a small sagebrush about as thick as my finger would turn a bullet. Lieutenant Edward Godfrey. The soldiers suffered from thirst and the Indians carefully guarded the river to prevent them from getting any water. Later in the battle, the firing ended. Later, it was thought that the Indians had news of the approach of Harry with Given's command. The timely revived without a doubt saved them from a fate similar to Custer.
After chasing Custer's command into the ravine, warriors positioned themselves along the ridge, known as Greasy Grass Ridge. On reaching Medicine Tail Creek, Custer held his command, and here the men rearranged their saddles. He rode to an officer who seemed in command and gave him an order. Immediately, the troop turned its direction towards Little Bighorn. Custer, with the remainder of his command, continued to the north about 3 miles from the river. Curly Crow Scout.
The Native Americans refer to this battle as the Greasy Grass Battle. The principal war chief engaged in the battle was Gall of the Hunkapapas. Gall, Crow King, and Crazy Horse played the leading part, while Sitting Bull, though important in the councils, took no part in the battle.
About 40 of the soldiers came galloping from the east part of the ridge down toward the river toward where soldiers shrank, and many of the ran back to the deep gulch. The soldiers stopped, got off their horses. Being white men, the South and Cheyenne chief came off his horse and called us to come back and fight. Then he could come out. After the brief encounter near the river, Custer's 2 companies retreat up the ravine known as Deep Coulee. Remainder of Custer's command skirmishes with warriors on the high ridge behind Crow King, Gal, and 2 Moons lead warriors and pursued the retreating soldiers.
Original grave sites from the battle are preserved by marble markers. They dot the battlefield. White represents the soldiers, red represents the Native Americans.
Indian warrior accounts tell of the soldiers charging into the coulee to break up the masses of warriors. Coming under heavy fire, they were forced back to the ridge where they fought behind a barricade and pack saddles, dead moles, dead horses, sides of bacon, anything that might possibly protected them from a bullet. Most were killed. This knoll was fought over by the soldiers and the Indians. Some evidence indicates soldiers of Company C occupied this position since bodies of Sergeant Finkel and Finley were found here. Indian testimony suggests that the Southern Cheyenne was leader named White Man led a charge near the ridge but fell a short time later.
As you walk and drive through the battlefield, look for single and small clusters of marble headstones to relive the battle. After separate skirmishings, Custer's command reunites here, but the warriors from the Cheyenne and Lakota soon overrun the hilltop and stampede the cavalry horses held in the ravine. The smoke was like a great cloud, and everywhere the Sioux went, the dust rose like smoke. We circled all around them, swirling like water around a stone.
Custer's command deploys in this area and advances into the basin before withdrawing to last stand hill toward the end of the battle. Company E moved toward Deep Ravine, overwhelmed by warriors including White Bull. These soldiers sought refuge in the Deep Ravine but were killed there.
We have now traveled back to where Custer brought his troops. He was unaware of the happenings with Reno. Along the trail, which winds below the last stand hill, is the story of soldiers and Indians who fought. On June 28, 3 days after the Battle of Little Bighorn, survivors from the 7th U.S. Cavalry, under the command of Reno, began the painful task of burying Custer's command. The men were buried where they fell in shallow graves marked with wooden teepee poles collected from the now-abandoned Indian village. Some of the Lakota and Cheyenne families and tribal members also marked the sites of their loved ones with small stones. Beginning in 1999, after consulting with the tribes, the Park Service began marking these sites with red granite markers.
A fierce charge began by about 20 young Lakota and Cheyenne suicide warriors who vowed to sacrifice themselves for their people. The suicide warriors galloped up to the level ground area where the cemetery now stands. Some of them stampeded the soldiers' horses. Some charged right in the midst of the troops. The soldiers who survived the attack retreated back to Last Stand Hill. Some attempted to reach the Little Bighorn River or a deep ravine but were killed quickly.
Assistant Surgeon George E. Lord was one of the 3 doctors serving the 7th Cavalry on June 25th. Dr. Lord was ill and Custer suggested that he remain with the pack train. Dr. Lord declined. Some evidence suggests his body was found on Last Stand Hill. His medical case was found in the abandoned village after the battle.
Looking back up the hill, you can barely see the Last Stand monument.
Lakota and Cheyenne and Arapaho warriors surrounded at the position near the Wilmette battle. Custer and about 41 men shot their horses for cover in the fight to the death. Custer and several soldiers were found at the top of the hill, while others were discovered along the slope.
Custer's brothers and nephew rode with him into battle. Tom Custer, Boston Custer, his brothers in the war, James Calhoun, and his nephew Arthur Williams. Custer's tombstone is white with black on the front. From this point you are viewing the battlefield from the soldier's point of the view, looking down at the hundreds of warriors slowly creeping close. Warriors fire their guns and arch their arrows towards the soldiers who were barely visible through the dust.
Historical evidence indicates that 28 soldiers fell here. Captain McDougal reported the presence of bodies. All of the bodies were buried in the deep gully. None was carried out. Some of the remains have been buried, and many of the marks on the trail actually belong in the deep ravine. Historical accounts and Indian testimony also indicates the use of deep ravine during the battle.
The remains of 220 soldiers, scouts, and civilians are buried around the base. The other officers' remains were moved in 1877 to other cemeteries throughout the country, and Custer was buried at West Point.
Total 7th Cavalry losses: Custer Battalion 210, Reno Benteen 53, Lakota and Cheyenne estimated 40 to around 100.
Behind the last stand memorial is the road that took us to Reno's battlefield. Across the road, the trail will take us to the Native American Memorial. For many years, the park only honored the U.S. Army's perspective. Unlike Custer's command, the fallen Lakota and Cheyenne warriors were removed by their families and buried in Native American traditional ways. The story of the battle from the Native American perspective was largely told through oral tradition. In 1991, U.S. Congress changed the name of the battlefield and ordered the construction of an Indian memorial. In 1996, the National Park Service, along with the Little Bighorn Advisory Committee, made up from the Indian nations involved in the battle, historians, artists, and architects, conducted a design competition, and in 1997, the design was selected.
When you enter the memorial, you will see it is a perfect circle in the center. Is a circle of red dirt. Around it is a circled stone walkway. In the inside walls are panels for each tribe. They fought in the battle: Sioux, Cheyenne, Arapaho, Crow, and Arikara. Each tribe lists their dead, as well as there are some pictographs. To the north is a memorial of spirit warriors. The area is wide open, so the Montana prayer can be seen. If you turn around from the warriors, you will see a gap in the mound called the Weeping Wall, where water continually trickles down into a pool, representing tears of the fallen warriors and soldiers, and centered perfectly in the center of the Weeping Wall can be seen the 7th Cavalry Monument. The Spirit Gate welcomes the fallen warriors and friendship. Peace, unity it is a peaceful place in this circle. Arapaho and Cheyenne. We had killed soldiers who had come to kill us. Wooden Lake Cheyenne, in remembrance of our fallen, where long hair was wiped out. June 25th, 1876, on March 15th, 1869. After the Washita battle, General Custer smoked the pipe with stone forehead, keeper of sacred arrows and sweet water. Custer promised, I will never harm the Cheyenne again. I will never point my gun at a Cheyenne again. I will never kill another Cheyenne. The ashes of the pipe were then poured on Custer's boot. If you break your promise, you and your soldiers will go to dust like this. If you are acting treacherously toward us sometime, you and your whole command will be killed. Stone forehead, arrow keeper, Cheyenne, 1869. Our land is everything to us. I want to tell you one of the things we remember on our land. We will remember the grandfathers paid for it with their lives. John Wooden Lake, Cheyenne, 1969. We all allied Dakota, Lakota, Nakota. We did not ask you white men to come here. The Great Spirit gave us our country as a home. You had yours. We did not interfere with you. You did not want to. Civilization, Crazy Horse. It was a hard battle, a terrible battle, because both sides were brave warriors. Red Feather, Dakota. That night the Lakota men, women, and children lighted many fires and danced. Their hearts were glad, for the Great Spirit had given them a great victory. Gone, Lakota.
Arikara. I'm going home today, not the way we came, but in spirit. Home to my people. Bloody Knife, June 25th, 1879. These old scouts, today we remember them the way of the old ones. The old ones who were the good ways that were our Arikara scout song.
The Crow country is exactly in the right place. Everything is good is to be found. There is no country like Crow country. Rotten belly crow. A scout is like a lone wolf that must be looking all the time. Red wing. Our leading chief saw that to help the white men fight their enemies, and ours would make them our friends. We had always fought the 3 tribes, Lakota, Cheyenne, and Arapaho. Our decision was reached because we plainly saw that the course was only one which might save our beautiful country for us. Keep plenty coops crow.
The act of tying scraps of fabric to trees is a wishful healing. Healing of past wounds and healing of the earth. The battleground tells the tale of 3 different points of view. The soldiers were doing what they were told from a government that embraced westward expansion and economic growth.
The Native Americans who embraced the land and followed the buffalo, which proved everything they needed till it was gone. They didn't believe one that could own the land and didn't understand those that could.
And finally, the scouts who had been defeated by the tribes involved in the battle. Their numbers were small and they lacked means to provide for their people. They believed they would be protected if they worked with the whites and protected them in the plains. The Crow had heard the words of Pointy Coop, who saw the disappearance of buffalo and they're replaced by spotted buffalo. The white man's cattle, the dream of Yellow Bear that told of how other Native American tribes who resisted the Americans had been beaten by the Pointy Coop told them that the Salaga or Crow must adapt to survive as people, each believing that they did what they needed to survive, each suffering great loss of life in the process.
Epilogue. Although the Sioux and Cheyenne won one of their greatest victories at the Little Bighorn, the battle actually marked the beginning of the end of the ability to rest the U.S. government. News of Custer's defeat soon reached the East. It was the centennial celebration for the nation, July 4th, 1876. They were outraged by killing one of the most popular heroes. There was a demand to intensify the military campaign against the Indians. Within a year, most had been rounded up or killed. In May 1877, Crazy Horse surrendered at Fort Robinson, Nebraska, where he was later killed in a disagreement with an Army officer. After fleeing to Canada, Sitting Bull eventually surrendered in 1881 and lived on Standing Rock Reservation till he was killed by an Indian agent policeman during a conflict at his house. Custer's wife, though, wanted her husband to go down in honor and promoted him as a brave hero cut down in the prime of his life while defending his country. Come to the Little Bighorn battlefield and feel the presence of the past.